Hi, Dr. Steve Wells. How are you today?
Hey, Joel, doing great.
Good,
It's
great.
good talking with you.
Good talking with you. Today, I just wanted to sort of do a get to know you. Um, and of course, I already know you a bit, but I
Yeah,
wanted to have our audience sort of get to know you and then sort of move on to any ideas, thoughts, expertise you have, maybe something you want to share with students
sure.
about dissertating or some other area of academia. Want to get into that, and then we're gonna talk about a way for students and just anybody to really keep up with you. Um, and I think you told me in an email before the interview that you're not really out there doing a whole lot of. You're not trying to be an influencer, correct?
No, not outside of my own sphere of influence. That's right.
You're not making makeup videos on the side, and um,
Not really. I make videos all the time, but I usually just send them to my own students. So here,
right.
watch this. Maybe this will help.
I might ask you more about that, but
Sure.
as we get started, like, what can you tell me? Can you tell me a little bit, within reason, the story of Dr. Steve Wells, and maybe before he was doctor?
Within
Where
reason.
where did you get started?
Yeah, I usually start by saying I was born in a very small cabin, which I helped my father build. But I guess you don't want me to go back quite that far. Um, let's see, native of Spokane, Washington, and I live in Minneapolis now, or at least the suburbs of Minneapolis. And in between that beginning and where I'm at right now, I put in about 25 years plus as a public school teacher,
Well,
instrumental music teacher, including a Texas band director, where things are insane. It's just crazier than you could even imagine. The football on Friday nights and all the things we did there. So,
oh yeah,
if any of your students are from East Texas or Northeast Texas, yeah, I'm that guy. I was insane back then, in my younger days, and we had a lot of fun and contributed, I hope, to a lot of kids' lives. But I
right.
was crazy. I was a crazy band director in Texas
Well,
for
I think that's what it takes for Texas, right? They have shows like Friday Night Lights, and
yeah,
um,
yeah,
it's huge.
yeah,
I
yeah. It is. I lived in a town where it was a small enough town that the high school it was focused around its one big high school. One
Mhm.
big high school, small town. Every Friday night, the town would empty into the football stadium.
Right.
And then eventually, when I got into public school administration, I moved up here to Minnesota because, being from Washington State, my kids were getting to the age where they were about to get into junior high
Mhm.
and or middle school, and I wanted to kind of make that change before they hit high school because we wanted to get closer to family and grandparents and so forth. And we got up here, and I remember seeing the football stadium at the very large, very upper class high school where I was hired to be an administrator. My primary job was over the arts departments
Uh-huh.
as well as other extracurriculars. And I remember looking at the football stadium that my principal, the one who was hiring me, was so proud of, and I almost committed a faux pas because I thought it was the practice field. It was so small. I said, "Oh, so this is the practice field?" He goes, "No, this is our stadium." He was so proud of it. And I said, "My band practiced on a field that was bigger than this, that was paved and had lights around it. Just the band field was bigger." But then he showed me the hockey rink, and I went, then that equaled the scales.
Right.
Hockey is big here, of course, in Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm way off the topic, but when I was I wasn't quite, I was never quite satisfied with what I was doing as a teacher.
Mhm.
I kept getting pegged for different leadership jobs, always being kind of funneled into places where I would speak to teachers or train teachers or take leadership. And then my older brother, who was also a music teacher at the college level, went ahead and got his doctorate.
Mhm.
And that kind of released me to, well, if he could do it, I know I could do it.
Right.
So I went to a brick and mortar weekends, and I worked at night, and finished my doctoral degree. And since then, there's good and bad. One of the things that I tell all of my students, whether they want to hear it or not, and this is really part of my story, so I'll just be honest about it, is that from day one and my very first class until I was completely finished, I got my doctorate in 2 years.
Wow.
I went through faster than a speeding bullet,
Mhm.
but I was kind of insane about it too. I was maybe almost obsessed, because I did it at the same time as I was a high school band director in Texas, where I was already putting in long hours. So, but I saved tons of money. I didn't go into any debt, but I tell my students all the money that I saved, I ended up spending with marriage counseling after all, you know?
Yeah.
So whether my students want to hear this or not, or whether your listeners or people who are watching this want to hear it or not, you have to remember that we're all juggling balls, and some of the balls are made out of rubber. And that's our doctoral program. Wherever we're going to school for our doctorate, we could take a leave of absence, we could drop out. They'll probably welcome us back with open arms anytime to
Right.
take our money.
Yeah, we want our money.
Those are rubber balls. You could drop
Right.
those and they'll bounce, but there's some balls that are made out of crystal. And if you drop those, they have a tendency to shatter. And if they do shatter, then it's difficult to put those back together again. And my marriage didn't shatter, but it was a tough time that my wife and I went through. We got some counseling. We recovered from my doctoral program, I guess you would say. And we just celebrated our 40th anniversary last year.
Congratulations.
So marriage is stronger than ever, and everything is just great. I say 40th anniversary. Now I have to explain that I married her when she was 5 years old. That's the only way that works mathematically. But at any rate, that's my story. I got my doctorate in educational administration.
Okay.
At the time, it was a challenge for me, because I thought, well, that qualifies me to be a superintendent or a curriculum director,
Mhm.
but I think I would rather teach college. But I was admitted into a fellowship program where it was a huge scholarship program where they paid, and I ended up going that route and into administration. But taking the long view, a doctorate of any flavor will, depending on your interests and your resume and the chemistry involved, that doctorate's going to open doors for you that you never imagined in any direction. Same with a PhD versus an EDD for those of us who are in education.
Mhm.
Students who haven't got their doctorate yet feel like there's a very big difference between getting a PhD and getting an EDD. And of course, there is a difference between those two degrees. But what I've found, and what most people I've talked to found, is once you got a doctorate, once you have a DR in front of your name,
Mhm.
you're probably going to be able to go anywhere that the chemistry and your interests and opportunity leads you.
Mhm.
The EDD versus PhD, I've worked as a doctor of education in public schools, and I've presented all over Southeast Asia, and I presented 3 times in China because
Mhm.
I was interested in that. And then I teach college level for the last 16 years. And I've been a college administrator as well as a college teacher. So PhD versus EDD, administration degree versus some other kind of degree.
Mhm.
Just getting that doctorate is going to open doors. One thing I could say with great authority is I've never regretted earning my doctorate.
Mhm.
It's always been worth it. The first thing that happened to me after I earned my doctorate is I got a salary cut at my public school. I made less money
Wow.
as it happened, not because I had a doctorate, of course, but it just didn't work to give more money. That wasn't part of their pay scale. But the doors of opportunity and the travel and the jobs and just the lifestyle that I live now I cannot recommend getting a doctor's degree high enough to a student. Stick with it, students. It's so much better than you think it's going to be.
I love the story, and I really appreciate you being a little vulnerable there and sharing something, I guess, a bit more sensitive, private. I think that hearing that about the crystal, I love the way you put it, the crystal balls. And I think and as chairs and subject matter experts, seconds, whatever you are on the committee, if we don't realize that, if we don't remember that people are juggling these balls, especially the crystal ones, then we may not encourage them to hold on tightly and to be careful. And I had similar crystal balls in my life, and not to get too in depth with it, but I had a failed marriage during my dissertation or during my doctorate. So I that's something I can relate to.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. And I went through, as I mentioned, as in a fellowship. So there were 15 other people that I went through every step of my doctorate with, at least for 18 months. And I finished it in 24 months. So that was most of the time I was with my cohort. And we shared really closely, after that first year of taking notes with each other and going to classes with each other. And then we did a lot of extracurricular things at the university because we were identified as a group. If someone wanted to do research, they would do it on us. I don't know how many psychological tests I took during that time. Seemed like every week somebody wanted to poke us and prod us. We went on retreats together. We went on team building. We climbed the ropes. We jumped off of things. We swam. We did everything together. And yeah, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for stresses in key relationships to take place during your doctoral degree. You really need to talk smart with don't just have one conversation, set up a weekly date or whatever. Or if it's not a spousal or partner situation, some sort, if it's just a key relationship, like with your kids, or if you're a caregiver for an older adult, or whatever that key relationship is, you'll need to be smart and structure time to maintain that appropriately. That's not to say that getting a doctor's degree is possible without sacrifice. I sacrificed a ton, and my wife sacrificed a ton, and we were both glad to do it. We're both benefiting from it. But the lack of communication and the lack of, on my part, and some things that went wrong were probably unnecessary. Sure, there was going to be some stress. Sure, there's going to be sacrifices, but nobody wants anyone to sacrifice their marriage or any other key relationship or their health through this process. That's just not what it's about. But then again, you have the other students at the far end of the spectrum. There are some students I've worked with who feel like, well, I've paid my tuition, so therefore give me my degree. I'm entitled to it. And my favorite story there is, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. One of the mistakes, I went and I joined a very expensive health club. I was a member of that health club for so long because they guaranteed I would lose weight if I followed their program. Well, I paid my money every single month, just like tuition, and I gained 20 pounds. So, just because you're paying tuition doesn't mean you're going to earn a doctorate any more than just joining a health club. And grad school is a very expensive health club. I'm not even sure how healthy it is.
Yeah.
So there's got to be sacrifice. So there's a balance.
No. Chrissy, Dr. Jameson, who we both work with, and I went to grad school with, and he always asks students, I think, what are you willing to give up at the beginning of a dissertation? So I always ask that question. What are you willing to give up? And hopefully we don't give up those crystal balls. And I think there's also something to be said there for having everybody on board
Yeah.
If you go back and I had a family and kids, and make sure everybody's 100% sort of tied into this. Do you want dad or mom or whoever? Are we all good with this? It's going to mean, sort of be realistic about here's how life is going to change during this time, and then maybe a little more support and understanding. Of course, it's still going to be extremely stressful.
Well, and I think that's a good point. As long as we're just kind of on this subject, and like I said earlier, it's not one conversation and then you work on your doctorate for 4 years.
Right.
Most students take 4 or 5 years to finish a doctoral program, and that's fast. 7. The smartest guy I know that I've ever worked with. I won't mention his name, but because I don't want him to get a big head, but I just respect him so much. But it took him 10 years to earn his doctorate. But there's nothing wrong with that. He did it. And it's not the speed at which you do it. But anyway, no one really knows what's going to be happening in the future. We have, as teachers, that's what we do for a living. And we work with people as they go through life.
Right.
Life, maybe it was John Lennon who said that life is what happens when you're making other plans. That's every single student. And every time I think I've just about heard it all, one of my students comes up with another. I've had students with COVID. I've had students with new babies. I've had students with incredibly ill babies. I have a student right now whose baby's going in for the 3rd brain surgery this week. And it just goes on and on and on. And we need to roll with the punches, and we need to support these students. And of course, we have structures at our universities to support students. But we as faculty member, sometimes we need to take off the academic hat and put on the nurturing hat. And some of us are better at nurturing than others. I'm not especially a strong nurturer, but at the same time, we got to give it our very best shot to help these guys get through it. And it's not a one-time, hey, Dad's going to get a doctorate, hang on. It's like you have to have some sort of a structure there.
I think that's very, very wise to have that plan in place.
The way I put it to my students, what Chrissy, we all think the world of Chrissy, Dr. Jameson. She's amazing. She walks on water. So if you're watching this, hi, Chrissy. But I tell my students, you're going to have to give up something. Just imagine that everyone is walking around with a gallon container of milk. MILK. I live in Wisconsin. I live in Minnesota. I kind of say milk, but I think I grew up saying milk. But anyway, you have a gallon container of milk, and you decide to get a doctor's degree. And in this metaphor, the milk is actually your time and your energy, what you could handle. So you've got a gallon container, and it's full of you got a gallon of milk in there. So now you're going to add a doctor's degree to that. Now, I don't know how much a doctor's degree is in milk, but I'd say it's at least a pint. Maybe it's another gallon. So I tell my students, I say, okay, so you're carrying around this gallon of milk, and now you're going to add a pint of milk into it. You're going to have milk everywhere. And this is the kind of spilt milk that you may be crying over. So you're going to have to pour some of the milk you're going to have to do something with that milk that you're already carrying around. If you're going to be doing extra stuff, you need to empty it out first so you have time, energy. So, maybe you're not going to take the garbage out anymore. I tried that. My wife didn't like it. That didn't fly. But, maybe you're going to, you're not going to go to the book club until your doctorate is over or whatever. Television, of course, is a horrific time eater. You don't watch TV very much at all when you're getting a doctorate. That's okay. You can watch all the TV you want later. So on and so forth. Anyway.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what do you want to, and you may not have anything picked out, but is there anything that maybe about dissertating or about academia that you haven't covered yet, maybe that
Sure.
you want to share with students and just sort of teach them something, a skill or a topic that you just don't mind elaborating on?
Well, you can notice that I work at Walden University, and
Mhm.
one of the things that I do a lot there is I teach at residencies. And at residencies, we have, I think we're about to rewrite the curriculum, but one of the things in the curriculum of our residencies that we think is really strong, and I hope we keep it, is a number of things that start with S. And I don't have my notes in front of me, but one of the things you have to do whenever you begin and whenever you're kind of getting into the swing of a new organization or lifestyle or enterprise, let's say you're going to climb Mount Everest or maybe Mount Kilimanjaro. There's kind of a socialization that takes place. Let's say you're going to join the Marine Corps, the few that proud the Marines. If you're going to get into any endeavor like that, let's say you're going to become a professional jazz musician, something I know a lot about. When you get into any endeavor of that magnitude,
Mhm.
there's a socialization. There's a socialization aspect to it. Like, what do mountain climbers do? What do Marines do? What's normal? What's normal for a jazz musician? Well, what's normal for a doctoral student? Well, not very much television watching is normal. Tons of reading is normal. Lots and lots of thought and writing things are normal. Lots of things are like when you get in the Marine Corps, push-ups are normal, and certain attitudes. So that's one of those S's. And now there's 4 or 5 of those S's that you got to go through. But one of the ones that really pops out to me is social change. And Walden, their hashtag used to be, or maybe it still is, right now you can see it says education for good. My screen is backwards, so I have to move my hand backwards to go to do education for good. And it used to be a higher degree, a higher purpose. Well, they're both saying the same thing.
Right.
And social change is something that is not just a selling point or marketing or anything like that. Social change has been found by the research to promote graduation rates. Let me explain.
Mhm.
I tell my students there's 2 things that's going to govern your doctoral project, your doctoral 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. The first thing is going to be your passion. Don't let it die.
Mhm.
And the second thing is going to be the research literature. Use it as your guide. Those 2 things combine. You can't do it without both. You need both.
Mhm.
But the more passion you have, the more energy you'll have. So when I started my doctorate, I was still an instrumental music teacher. And I said, by George, I'm going to study how to keep music in the public schools. That's what I was up in arms about at the time. I still think it's important, but at the time, it was my passion. And it motivated me because I said, I am going to make a difference. I am going to make a difference. And every single one of my students that I've ever taught, at least at Walden, has had some sort of a passion like that. And what we as professors and we as students need to do is keep that passion alive, because it will literally help you to graduate sooner.
Mhm.
It's not just a warm, fuzzy idea. You have to sell yourself on the fact that you're going to change the world. You really are. You really are. I mean, if no one else changes the world, it's going to be teachers. I
Mhm.
mean, I really believe that. I just think that teachers, there's a few other professions that are in there too, but teachers, what a powerful, and teachers of teachers. Most people who are getting their doctorate are becoming leaders in the field of education. It's extremely potent. If you pour your life into someone who's going to pour their life into 100 more people,
Right.
then that's a pretty good investment.
Right.
We're getting into a pouring theme here. We got the milk, we got the pour,
waterfalls.
Yeah, the ripples that expand from the pond, that whole thing. But I really do think that as long as you're paying attention, now if you get away from the research literature,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be in trouble as a doctoral student. But as long as you submit to the lit, as we say, as long as you submit to the research literature, submit to the lit, then keep that passion flowing, that you're going to position yourself to help kids. For me, it's helping kids, because that's what I used to do for a living. I used to spend all hours of the day and night as a high school band director in the back of a band bus late on a Friday night, coming back from who knows where. And remember, a 2-hour drive in Texas is just a medium trip. Right. So we would be coming back in the back of the band bus, and I had students skipping class to come out to my office to tell mom and dad broke up last night. I mean, all of those things that teachers do at every level for kids, you could multiply the change, the positive social change that you make with a doctor's degree. It'll practically happen without you even knowing it. But don't lose sight of that inspirational component. Yeah. Now, that's kind of like an overview. I mean, there's some things that I love to talk to students about in terms of, you'll graduate like at least 6 months earlier if you learn this skill. And we could talk about that in a minute, but the overall, one of those S's is socialization. As I said, one is social change. One is picking up some skills. One, though, is support, and that's ganging up together with your buddies who are also doctoral students and figuring out how to work smart. Mm-hmm. I didn't graduate with a doctorate start to finish in 2 years all by myself.
Right.
I had a cohort of buddies, mm-hmm. and the professors hated to see a lot of us in the same class, because we would take over the class. We just did a lot of things. Maybe I'm not proud of all of them, but we got through the program in a very smart way, and we learned a lot about teams and grouping and leadership through practical experience. In a way, it was a lab. But a lot of our goals were just to not game the system, but to use each other for maximum support to move forward. And I hate to see doctoral students trying to do this all by themselves. They need someone to talk to, and not your spouse, not your dog. You need someone to talk to who's also searching the literature. So support is one of those S's that's super huge. So, I'm going to stop talking about these vagaries. I could talk about some more specific things, but these things that start with the letter S are attitudes that I really endorse for doctoral students. I strongly do.
No, I appreciate that. I'm just reflecting. I'm taking it all in, and I hope the audience can do the same. If you can finish faster with passion, you can. But it also can keep you from jumping off the ledge, so to speak. As we say, we use a horrible metaphor there with students that are thinking about quitting the dissertation or project study. They're thinking about quitting. It's that passion that can keep you, from jumping and pull you back in. So
we need to change the world, mm-hmm. and it's going to take all of us. And I'm very proud. I'm very proud of teachers. I'm not one of these professors that. How can I put this? I'm not one of these professors who leans back in his chair and says, "Well, you're a doctoral student. You should know better by now." I don't agree with that mentality at all, because the students that I teach, including the very worst writer, mm-hmm. and the goofiest intellect in the group, mm-hmm. and I'm thinking of someone right now. Even the worst student that I teach from the doctoral Ivy League traditional sense of a PhD-ish intellect, the worst student I teach is some sort of a genius when it comes to working with kids, some sort of a genius. And she's doing stuff I couldn't dream of doing. She wants to get a doctorate. Okay, so she has to learn skills, and I have to hold her accountable. And maybe she won't make it. Maybe she'll run out of time or money, or maybe I'll say, maybe you just need to get another master's. But the point is that we're all so gifted, and I'm so proud to be working with teachers, and these teachers who have the courage to put their money where their mouth is and then go and get a doctor's degree. And then now they're halfway finished with it, and all of a sudden every single one, there's no exceptions to this rule. Every single one goes, I don't think I should be doing this. I'm an imposter. There's never been a doctoral student who doesn't say that. Well, maybe there's a couple of weirdos out there. Maybe I was one of those weirdos. I think I said, well, my big brother did it, so I know I could do it, that kind of thing. But for the most part, we all feel that way, and we all need to be recognized for the giftedness. I think I totally lost track of what I was going to say. Go ahead.
I'm enjoying it. Tell me, maybe we transition
Sure.
with the time we have left to talk about some of those skills that you would encourage.
I was thinking about this earlier today. I've been, as I said, I put in a full career as a public school teacher and administrator. And then there was kind of a hiatus, actually, where I did some other work that was not related directly to education. And I did some traveling and stuff, and some outreach with not really doctors across borders stuff, but I'm not that kind of a doctor. But just some mission trips with my church, and I got involved with that for a while, and then found my way back into education full time. And I've been doing education full time as a professor for close to 16 years. I started part time, and then I went into full time. And it's all been here at Walden University, and it's been wonderful. And over the last 16 years, I've made a lot of mistakes, and there's some things I'm not very good at. Some things, at least, I'm not known, I don't think, for being good at. But I think that part of my brand, part of what I am known, is, like you said earlier, Joel, talking students down off the ledge. So there have been a lot. I'm not the only person like this. Like I said, there's people who are more nurturing than me all around, but I've been given a lot of rescues, a lot of students who've had a real negative experience for some reason or another, and then they give them to me to kind of breathe life into them and try to get them through the program. Stuck students and whatnot. So I've had some students who are super duper smart, way smarter than me. And then I've had some students that were just really struggling. I won't go into that any further, because my point, if I have one, is that what is it that is the advice I give most commonly to students who are actually in the midst of they're actually in the process of working on their dissertation or their doctoral capstone. So there's two lectures. One is, well, you want to be a golfer, you want to be a professional golfer. Well, these are the sacrifices, and this is all the stuff you got to be if you want to be a professional golfer. But then there's another one that says, you need to hold your hand like this when you're swinging the club. Okay. So what I'm getting into now is not all of the framework, general socialization, social change things, but more like, how do you hold your hand when you're actually swinging the club if you're being a golfer? What's the technique? Well, I could tell you right away that the number one issue that my students need to improve on, it's kind of one of those overlapping issues. It's hard to say just one thing. It's more complicated. It's a little bit like an Oreo sandwich or stacked up. But it has to do with establishing, especially early in the process, establishing a crystal clear, straightforward, unambiguous problem statement.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my colleagues, if you ask them what's the one failing of most of our doctoral students, they say alignment. And I agree with that, but I have a different way of saying alignment. I say clear, crystal clear, unambiguous statement of the problem
Mm-hmm.
is necessary so you have something to align with. And, I usually talk about all kinds of goofy little things with my students. I'll say, okay, so if your problem is, there's worms in the apples. That's a classic. If the problem is, I love this one. If I say, okay, if the problem is there are worms in the apples,
Mm-hmm.
then, well, we could play with that statement. We could say, well, you mean everywhere? Or do you mean just in New York State? And then we start kind of narrowing it, trying to get it to be the narrowest problem as possible. But the whole idea there is clarity. But once you get a student to where the problem is clear, then comes something that is maybe just as hard, or it's like right there with it. It's like hard to separate these two issues. One is, have you stated the problem so specifically and clearly that it's just impossible for anyone to misunderstand it? When I read my students' problem statements, I try to misunderstand it.
Right.
They have to make it impossible for me to misunderstand what the problem is. And I tell them my 3 favorite words in the English language used to be, I love you, especially if my wife said it. But now my 3 favorite words in the English language are, wait for it, the problem is,
Right.
unless my wife is saying it. And I have my students say, the problem is da, 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 da.
Right.
Now, the very, very next thing in the same breath is, and I never write this to my students anymore, but who says?
Right.
I was told that it's rude to write that to doctoral students, so I don't do it anymore. Now I say, why do you believe this? Smiley face.
According to
Yeah, I can improve. But I don't say who says anymore. I say, why do you believe this? So, all right. So what happens is we have students who have recognized problems of every stripe. But then when it comes time for them to substantiate and give evidence, as if they're in a court of law, that this really is a problem, they're unable to do so because they're not trained as critical thinkers. It's my personal belief that teachers are trained as problem solvers,
Mm-hmm.
maybe as negotiators, as decision makers on behalf of kids, mostly. Kids, young adults, whatever. But teachers are not trained as critical thinkers. Now, lawyers are. I mean, you get a lawyer and they say, well, where's your evidence? Where's your proof? Does that proof apply directly to this proposition? Maybe debaters are trained as critical thinkers. Not talking about our political system, though, not those debates. I mean, just real live debaters in high school.
Real debaters.
Real debaters, like high school.
Yeah.
I could probably just put the words like high school after all my statements and they would make sense. So anyway, all that just to say that if my students, the average student that I teach, I would say 90% of the time, at least 90% of the time with my students, I don't know about your students, Joel, if they say the problem is there are worms in the apples. I'll say, how do you know? Give us evidence of this problem. And then they'll say this. They'll say, Jones and Jones 2020 found that apples are part of a very nutritious diet, and we must feed apples to children.
Mm-hmm.
Frank and James 2020 found that apples are beautiful and very important for our economy and farmers. And what they'll do is they'll give 2 or 3 more citations about the importance of apples, but they haven't substantiated the problem. Or some of my colleagues would say they haven't substantiated that there's a gap in the literature about that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my students, it's easier for me to say exactly what I just said. Okay, so Jones and Jones said that apples are important. Does that evidence the problem in a court of law? What's the judge going to say? The judge is going to say, no, that doesn't evidence it, Steve. I'm going to say, why? Well, because nobody even mentioned the worms.
Right.
Nobody even mentioned the worms. So if you're going to, and I know that this sounds elementary, and it is elementary, but it's just a fact of life that some of my students come in, they say the problem is the disciplinary records of male African-American 5th graders is 2 times higher than their corresponding cohort that are non-African-American.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, that's a horrific problem.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that's true? And they say, here's my evidence. Jones and Jones found that racial disparities do exist, and it's important that we treat children with equality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I agree with that completely. Of course I do. And I always tell my students, yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. But you have to mention the worms. You have to show the data that says this is a problem. And then and so whenever I've done this 100 times, my students I say, tell me what your problem is, and then I'm going to tell you that I'm going to sue you. And they tell me their problem, and then I go, I'm going to sue you. And every single one of my students are always so surprised when I do that. They go, what do you mean? I go, I've been talking too long. You're not listening to me. So I said, okay, I'm suing you for saying that. Now we're in a court of law, and the judge just said, why are you saying that there's worms in these apples? Well, because Jones and Jones 2015 found worms in 90% of the apples. Oh, then we have evidence that there's a problem. And now that I've established that as the bedrock for the problem statement, then I take it to my students that you need to use that evidence-based or critical thinking skill in every paragraph. Start the paragraph with an important statement that you really want to say. Mm-hmm. And I got a new thing. I just started this last week. I used to call it the main idea. I used to call it the topic sentence. Now I call it the must say sentence. Mm-hmm. Don't give me a paragraph that starts off with something that's just true. I'm not interested in what's just true. I'm interested in what you must say. And I usually that's taken from the rubric or from their passion. So instead of saying qualitative research is inductive, that's true, but is that what you must say? So we changed that to qualitative research or qualitative design is the appropriate method for my study or for this study. They must say that. Mm-hmm. So start with a must say sentence. And then in the same way, give me smoking gun evidence that what you just said is true. And our students are trained, and I'll stop with this, but our students are trained, all of us are trained in high school, bachelor's degree, and master's degree to say something, give a citation, say something, give a citation, say something, give a citation. But at the doctoral level, you say a must say, give 3 citations, explain it, and conclude. Then you go on to the next idea, 1 idea per paragraph. And man, if I had a magic wand, I'd wave that over all my students and they would all graduate a year earlier. I tell you what.
for sure. No, I that's something I think both of us constantly try to.
I know you do. I've seen your comments.
So I learned a lot from you, honestly. As I said in the email to the interview invitation, you served as a mentor to me early in my sort of online and sharing work. I know you've got a lot more to share. I'd love to invite you back in the future, but I know you need to go today.
Yeah.
Is there any way that students or academics, scholars, or lay people should keep up with you? Any tags you want to put out there? Twitter?
Yeah, not really at this time. I'm at steve.wells.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, not Stephen, but steve.wells at mail.waldenu.edu.
All right.
And I'm on my email all the time, and that's the best way to get in contact with me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but I'm not. I flirted with the idea of opening up shop on the internet, but really my job at Walden and just in higher ed in general keeps me so busy and contented that
Of course, I'm right there
do
with
much
you.
else.
Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Pleasure.
Me and this has been a great time here with Dr. Steve Wells. Thank you.